welcome to the Sleep Science Galaxy channel. In this moment, as the day slowly draws to a close and the movements of the outside world begin to soften, perhaps you are resting within a familiar stillness. Time continues to move, but no longer in a hurry. It is present like a steady breath, requiring no attention, no control. For a very long time, humans have believed that time is the same everywhere, for everyone. A shared current, quietly supporting all events. Yet the universe is not always as simple as that feeling suggests. In places far beyond imagination, time can stretch, slow down, or even lose its shared rhythm altogether. In this video, we will not rush to find answers. Instead, we will simply sit together and listen to the story that science tells about time, slowly, deeply, and without the need for a hurried conclusion. The intuition of time, everyday certainty. Time rarely enters our lives as a question. It is there even before we become aware that we exist. Morning arrives after sleep, evening closes a day. And between those two moments, everything unfolds in an order so familiar that it requires no thought. A clock on the wall moves quietly. The second hand passes each small mark with a steady rhythm, neither hurried nor hesitant. Whether we notice it or not, it continues. And it is precisely this continuity that creates a deep sense of reassurance, that there is a shared current carrying every moment along. As children, we learn time without needing explanations. Morning is when we wake up. Noon is when we eat. Evening is when we rest. Everyone around us lives within the same rhythm. If today is Monday, then tomorrow will be Tuesday, without question. Birthdays return each year. Seasons change in a slow, repeating cycle. All of this makes time feel like a quiet companion, always arriving on schedule, never forgetting anyone. This feeling does not come from numbers or definitions. It comes from direct, lived experience. When waiting for water to boil, we know it will boil after a while. When night falls, we know morning will come again. These expectations are rarely wrong, and so we gradually believe that time is the same everywhere. It flows at the same pace for everyone, no matter where they are or what they are doing. We believe this, not because we have carefully reasoned it out, but because we have never had a reason to doubt it. In everyday life, time does not need to be named. It is present like air. We do not ask whether air exists unless it is missing. We do not ask what time is unless something makes it feel strange. A delayed train, a stretch of waiting that feels long, a day that passes too quickly. But even then, the strangeness is usually attributed to our feelings, not to time itself. We say that it feels long, feels fast, rather than saying that time itself has changed its rhythm. There is a deep comfort in the idea that time is shared by everyone, that when we look up at the night sky, someone else, somewhere on Earth, is also living within that same night. That when the clock strikes midnight, it strikes midnight for everyone. This thought creates a quiet sense of connection, as if we are all sitting together on a large vessel, drifting along an invisible river that we all share. In this way of sensing it, time belongs to no one. It takes no sides. It flows evenly, objectively, untouched by human desires or fears. Whether we are joyful or sad, busy or exhausted, time continues. It is precisely this indifference that makes it feel reliable. It does not change because of our emotions. It does not show favoritism. It simply is. And so, for most of our lives, we live as if time is the most solid foundation of reality. Every plan rests upon it. every memory is arranged within it. The past lies behind. The future lies ahead. The present is a fragile point that is constantly passing. This arrangement is simple, clear, and good enough to navigate everyday life. When we say now, we rarely consider that our now might be different from someone else's. The word seems to carry a shared meaning, needing no explanation. It refers to this moment, here, unfolding. And because everyone uses the word in the same way, we believe it truly points to the same thing. There is a shared present, a shared rhythm, a shared flow. Even clocks reinforce this belief. Wall clocks, wristwatches, clocks on our phones. All of them display the same time, with only minor differences, if any. When a clock runs slow or fast, we do not doubt time itself. We simply adjust the clock. Time, in our thinking, is always correct. Only the measuring tool can be wrong. This sense of certainty runs so deep that it becomes the ground of our thinking. We think within time. We speak of before and after. We understand cause and effect by placing them within a clear temporal sequence. Causes come first, effects come later. This order seems impossible to reverse, and so it creates a feeling of stability. The world has order because time has order. In the quiet space of an evening, when everything slows down, this feeling becomes even clearer. We may hear the ticking of the second hand, or at least sense the gentle passing of each moment. Nothing is pressing. Nothing is unusual. Time is simply doing what it has always done, flowing. It is this familiarity that makes time so rarely noticed. It is too close to be seen. It is like the sky behind the stars. We see the stars. We see movement. But the sky itself is always there, silent. And because it demands no attention, we assume it has nothing to say. And yet, sometimes, simply pausing long enough within this familiarity allows a very subtle feeling to appear. Not doubt, but a small gap. An unformed question. If time truly is this simple, why do humans need to create so many ways to measure it? Why do clocks need to become ever more precise? Why must they be synchronized across the entire world? These questions do not need to be answered right away. In this space, they only need to be set down, like a small stone by the water's edge. Time continues to flow. Clocks continue to run. Everything remains safe. But somewhere, very deep beneath the surface of familiarity, there is a small fragility within that sense of certainty. And that fragility, however slight, is enough to open a door. Not a door to confusion, but a door to listening. Listening to the very distant whispers of the universe, where time may not be exactly as we have always felt it to be. But that can wait. Right now, in this moment, time is still flowing slowly, evenly, enough for us to rest a little longer within the comfort of its familiarity. Psychological time versus physical time. And then, when that familiarity is held long enough, we may begin to notice something very subtle, almost soundless. That although time outside seems to flow evenly, the feeling of it within us is not fixed at all. There are afternoons that stretch as if they will never end, and there are days that pass so quickly that, looking back, we cannot tell where they went. Time is still that same time, but the way it appears within us changes. Soft, fluid, and difficult to grasp. Inside the human body, there's no clock with hands and a face. There's no steady sound marking each moment. Instead, there are quiet biological rhythms, small oscillations of cells, of breath, of heartbeat. The brain does not count time. It senses change. It links movements, memories, and sensations into a continuous stream of experience, and then calls that stream time. When many things happen at once, when the world brings novelty or surprise, the brain becomes more alert. It records more details, leaves behind more traces. Such a moment may later be remembered as if it lasted a very long time, even though on the clock it occupied only a brief interval. In moments of fear or astonishment, time seems to stretch, not because it truly slows down, but because inside us, more is moving than usual. By contrast, on familiar days, when everything unfolds in the same rhythm, the brain does not need to pay much attention. It follows well-worn paths. Fewer new imprints are formed. Looking back, those days may blur together, like small ripples overlapping on the surface of a still lake. We say that time passed quickly, but in truth, the memory of it has thinned. These experiences are so common that we tend to treat them as matters of feeling alone. We believe that time itself remains steady, and only our perception changes. And in one sense, this is true. Yet the very difference between perception and measurement reveals a delicate gap. The gap between time as it is lived and time as it is measured. The human body carries cycles shaped across many generations. Cycles of sleep and waking, hunger and fullness, light and darkness. These rhythms are tied to sunlight, to the rotation of the earth, to the environment in which our ancestors lived for a very long time. They create a background sense of time, a biological regularity that helps us orient ourselves in the world. But these rhythms are not as precise as clocks. They can drift, slow down, or speed up, depending on circumstances. When we travel far, change environments, feel tired or stressed, our sense of time also shifts. This does not unsettle us, because we rarely expect absolute accuracy from sensation. We only need it to be good enough to live. Long ago, some thinkers already sensed this difference, even without machines or experiments. They spoke of time as an inner flow, impossible to divide into equal units. A flow with quality, with feeling, unlike the dry numbers on a clock face. Within that flow, one sad minute can feel longer than an hour of joy. Not because time itself changes, but because the way we inhabit it changes. Clocks, with their evenly spaced markings, offer a different kind of time, a time that can be shared, compared, communicated. Through it, we make appointments, build schedules, synchronize our lives. This measured time is deeply useful. It allows people to cooperate, to build, to explore. But it does not fully coincide with the time that is lived from within. These two modes of presence usually blend smoothly enough that we do not need to distinguish them. We wake according to an alarm clock, but feel the morning through our bodies. We work by the hour, but grow tired according to biological rhythms. Most of the time, this mismatch causes no trouble. It simply exists quietly, like two streams flowing side by side. When night falls and the outside world softens, it becomes easier to sense the inner flow of time. There's no need to be punctual, no need to count, only to feel the breath, the heaviness of the eyelids, the slowing of thoughts. In these moments, time is no longer something to manage. It becomes a space for rest. Recognizing that our sense of time is shaped by the brain does not make time any less real. It simply places each thing where it belongs. Sensation is a biological way of living. Measurement is a scientific way of coordinating. They are not opposed, nor do they need to be fully unified. They serve different purposes on different levels of experience. And so, when we begin to feel that time can stretch or contract within experience, it does not undermine the safety of the world. It gently separates two layers that we once unconsciously merged into one. The layer of sensation, soft, flexible, tied to biology and memory. And the layer of measurement, regular, stable, tied to tools and convention. This separation does not need to be understood immediately. It only needs to be allowed to remain, like a thin mist between two fields of light. In this quiet space, we do not need to decide what time really is. We only need to allow the thought that there are many ways for time to appear, and that the way we feel it is a natural part of being human. That stream of reflection can continue to flow, unhurried, undemanding. Time outside remains steady. Time inside remains soft. And between these two currents, we can rest safely in a quiet night, where science does not speak in explanations, but whispers very gently that this world is a little deeper than what we have grown used to. Why time feels absolute at human scales. And as that stream of sensation settles, another form of reassurance quietly emerges. That even though our inner feeling of time may be soft and changeable, the world around us continues to operate with a dependable stability. The sun still rises each morning. Darkness still returns each evening. Walking from one room to another does not make the day noticeably longer or shorter. At this pace of life, time behaves gently, evenly, as if it wishes to be regarded as simple. Human beings live slowly compared to what the universe allows. We move at the speed of footsteps, of vehicles, of flights that remain very modest when measured against the speed of light. We live within a familiar gravitational field, where gravity is strong enough to keep us grounded, but not strong enough to make time behave in ways that are clearly unfamiliar. In this space, nearly all clocks agree with one another. And if there are differences, they are so small that they never touch lived experience. At this scale, time does not demand attention. It does not need correction, does not invite suspicion. 1 second today is as long as 1 second yesterday. An hour passing in the morning is no different from an hour passing in the evening, at least as far as the body and the senses can tell. And so, the feeling that time is shared even, and the same for everyone, becomes a solid foundation. That foundation is not a mistake. It is the result of living within a very narrow region of reality, where all differences are too small to matter. Here, intuition works well. It does not need to know about distant limits. It only needs to help humans orient themselves, predict, coordinate. And for hundreds of thousands of years, that intuition has done its work remarkably well. Our ancestors did not need to understand time at extreme velocities or within intense gravitational fields. They needed to know when to hunt, when to rest, when to seek shelter. They needed to feel the rhythm of day and night, of dry seasons and rainy seasons. A sense of time that was stable, repetitive, and reliable was an advantage. It allowed life to persist, not under extreme conditions, but within familiar cycles. And so, the body and the brain were shaped to trust regularity, to trust that tomorrow will resemble today enough to make plans, to trust that a period of waiting will end, enough to avoid panic, to trust that the world will not abruptly change its rhythm, enough to feel safe. This trust is not philosophy. It is biology, etched deeply across generations. And within the range where humans live, that trust is rarely betrayed. Time does not suddenly slow down when we cross a doorway. It does not speed up when we run faster. Any differences that do exist lie beyond perception. They are so small that an entire lifetime can pass without leaving a single mark on direct experience. This creates a gentle harmony between sensation and measurement. The clock says one thing, the body feels another, but the two are not different enough to cause disturbance. One can live an entire life without knowing that, under other conditions, time might behave differently, and that not knowing does not make life any less complete. There is a quiet wisdom in limiting intuition to where it functions well. Intuition was not born to describe the entire universe. It was born to help humans live fully within a very small corner of it. In that corner, time is even enough to be treated as absolute. Not because it truly never changes, but because any change lies beyond relevance. When we stand still on the ground, when we walk, when we drive, the differences in the flow of time between those motions are far too small to become experience. They do not make mornings longer than evenings. They do not make childhood shorter or old age longer in any way we can feel. And so, treating time as a fixed backdrop is entirely reasonable. In this quiet space, there is no need to reject intuition in order to open the door to deeper understanding. Intuition is not wrong. It simply does not tell the whole story. It tells the part of the story that humans need in order to live, not the part the universe would tell in order to be fully understood, like the ground beneath our feet. When we stand still, it feels flat. And for our steps, that feeling is enough. No one needs to think about the curvature of the earth to walk from home to the street. That sense of flatness does not lead us astray. It only becomes incomplete when we try to see far beyond the scale of human sight. Time is the same. At the scale of everyday life, it is flat, even, stable. That feeling does not need to be corrected. It only needs to be placed in context. A context in which differences exist, but are not yet large enough to become experience. And for this reason, there is a deep comfort in realizing that feeling time as absolute is not a dangerous illusion. It is a very good approximation, an approximation good enough to build a life, to love, to wait, to rest. It only begins to tremble when we step outside the familiar zone, when speed becomes extreme, when gravity becomes intense. But here, in this room, in this breath, none of that is required. Time is still flowing in a way the body understands. Each second follows the next gently. There is nothing to be alert for. There is nothing to fix. The stream of reflection can continue without disturbing this safety. Understanding that intuition has limits does not make the world unstable. On the contrary, it makes the present stability more precious, because it is not a universal given, but a very special condition in which humans happen to live. And within that condition, we can rest assured, allowing time to remain a quiet, reliable companion. Even enough for us to soften the body, let thoughts drift, and rest a little longer before the universe's whispered story opens into more distant rhythms, slow and very gentle. Classical physics and absolute time, Newton's legacy. And within that familiar stability, human beings gradually learn to name the world, not through sensation, but through clearer outlines, through words and symbols. When looking up at the sky, when observing the repeating motions of the stars, the moon, the planets, a very natural desire arose to understand the order that supports everything, to understand not in order to possess, but to feel at ease, to trust that this universe can be read, can be relied upon. In that setting, time did not need to be sought. It was already there, quiet and firm, like the ground beneath one's feet. People did not ask what time was. They used it to ask everything else. How long an object moves, how fast another falls. One event happens before, another comes after. Time became a shared flow, invisible yet always present, allowing all motion to be arranged. There is a gentle comfort in treating time as an unchanging foundation. It is like a tightly stretched canvas on which all forms can be drawn clearly. When the canvas does not tremble, the lines appear sharp. And for many centuries, people lived with the belief that this canvas was always the same, everywhere, for everything. In the early pages of scientific thought, time appears as something self-evident. It needs no introduction, does not need to be proven. It is simply what everything else happens within. The motions of a falling apple, of a swinging pendulum, of planets orbiting the sun are all described as stories unfolding in time. Yet time itself does not participate in the story. It does not change, does not respond, does not speak. There is a very particular silence here. Time is not treated as a character, but as the stage, a stage so vast that no one thinks to ask whether it might curve, might vibrate, or might deform. On that stage, objects appear, move, collide, and depart. Time remains behind, unchanged, waiting for the next performances. Not everyone felt completely at ease with this picture. Somewhere within the flow of thought, there were quieter voices suggesting that time might not be something that exists independently. That perhaps, without change, there would be nothing to call time at all. That time might only be a way of ordering events, rather than a separate flow of its own. But these ideas passed very softly, without disturbing a foundation that was working smoothly. Because in practice, the view of time as an absolute foundation worked remarkably well. It allowed humans to predict the motions of planets with astonishing precision. It made possible the construction of machines, bridges, and structures based on reliable calculation. When an assumption produces such stable results, it gradually becomes invisible. It is no longer seen as an assumption. It becomes taken for granted. In that picture, time resembles a straight river, flowing evenly from past to future. Everything drifts within that river, but the river itself is unaffected by what passes through it. Whether it is a small stone or a large boat, the water flows as it always has. This image aligns closely with human intuition, fits everyday life with ease, and for that reason, takes root very deeply. Equations were written with time placed in a special position. It was not something to be explained, it was something used to explain. All change was measured by how fast or how slow it occurred in time. But no one asked what time itself was fast or slow relative to. That question seemed unnecessary. And for a very long time, it truly was unnecessary. As long as humans did not move too fast, did not look too far, did not encounter the extreme conditions of the universe, time behaved exactly as its quiet role required. It caused no trouble. It raised no objections. It allowed the world to be described as a vast machine, operating according to stable, predictable laws. There is a sense of calm in this way of seeing. It offers the feeling that the universe has order, and that this order does not depend on the observer. Time does not lean toward anyone. It does not change because someone is watching. It flows evenly, regardless of everything. This makes the world feel trustworthy, and that trustworthiness is deeply precious. And so, when new theories later emerged, when humans began to look at the very small, the very fast, or the very distant, they carried that notion of time with them as something self-evident, not because they lacked creativity, but because they were standing on a foundation that had been solid for centuries. Time had done its job too well, for too long, to be questioned immediately. In this stream of reflection, there is no need to judge right or wrong. It is enough to feel how natural it was. Treating time as absolute was not a naive mistake. It was a perspective well suited to the world humans were living in, a world where everything unfolded slowly, where gravity was familiar, where motions did not push time out of its silence. And so the idea of absolute time was not a rigid imposition. It was an honest reflection of lived experience, extended through mathematics. It carried the rhythm of human life, lifted into the language of stars and equations. In this quiet space, we can look back on that perspective with appreciation, not to cling to it, not to rush to discard it, only to see that it once served as a very steady anchor, keeping human thought from drifting into chaos. And it was from that anchor that longer journeys could begin. The flow of time, in that classical image, still moves evenly in the background of the story. It has not yet been bent, not yet been questioned. It simply rests there, stable enough to allow humans to rest in the feeling that this world can be understood, step by step, within the slow and safe rhythm they had come to know. Quantum mechanics and borrowed time. And then, when that seemingly solid foundation had become familiar enough to fade from attention, the very small world began to whisper something different, not through large motions or familiar forces, but through the silence between particles, through gaps where intuition was no longer fine enough to reach. Humans began to look deeper, beyond the surface of matter, into delicate structures where things no longer behaved like marbles rolling across a flat plane. There, matter was no longer solid blocks with clear positions and smooth trajectories. It became blurred, both wave and particle, both present and fading away. Laws that once worked seamlessly suddenly proved insufficient. This world required a different language, lighter, more flexible, and humans gradually built that language, slowly, carefully, with much quiet wonder. Yet amid all these profound changes, one thing remained almost unchanged. Time was still there, like an old acquaintance invited along on a new journey. It was not questioned. It was not fragmented or made uncertain. Even as everything else became ambiguous, time kept its familiar place, standing outside, observing, allowing all transformations to unfold. In these new descriptions of the microscopic world, states change, possibilities overlap, outcomes appear only when observed. But all of this is still arranged in a familiar sequence. There is a before, and there is an after. There is preparation, then unfolding, then result. Time remains the straight thread, quietly connecting one moment to the next. No one deliberately held time back. There was simply no practical reason to do otherwise. Experiments took place in enclosed rooms, at speeds not too great, under familiar gravitational conditions. There, time behaved obediently, just as it had in the classical world. It caused no difficulty. It did not disrupt predictions, and so it was trusted. The quantum world, strange as it may be, still needs a shared rhythm in order to be told as a story. States evolve in time. Probabilities change in time. And to compare prediction with observation, people must agree on how much time has passed. Without that agreement, results would scatter, unable to be assembled into a coherent whole. So time retained its old role. It did not become part of the haze. It did not fluctuate. It did not superpose. It was not placed in a state of both being and not being. It stood outside all of that, like a straight pillar, allowing the quantum world to lean against it without collapsing. There is a sense of calm in this choice. Because of it, predictions reach astonishing accuracy. Numbers align with experiments in subtle, persistent ways. Devices built upon these new laws operate steadily, repeatedly, reliably. Time, in its quiet role, continues to carry out the task it has known for a very long time. But if one pauses long enough to listen, a very slight misalignment can be felt, almost soundless. Everything else in the picture becomes uncertain, dependent on observation, on context, on relationship. Time alone does not. It does not need to be measured by the same rules as other quantities. It has no uncertainty of its own. It is not affected by who is observing. This difference is not loudly named. It does not provoke argument in laboratory corridors. It simply remains there, like a hidden seam, holding the entire structure together. A necessary seam, yet one that does not fully blend with the surrounding fabric. Time, in this picture, is not something discovered. It is something borrowed. Borrowed from the familiar world, where clocks still tick evenly, where people still agree on a shared rhythm. The quantum world is built upon that foundation, like a modern house erected on an ancient stone base. There is no haste in this. Science does not promise perfection from the beginning. It seeks descriptions that work best in each context. And in the context of exploring the very small, keeping time as a stable foundation is a gentle, practical choice. Safe enough to move forward. Yet that very gentleness carries with it a faint sense of imbalance. Time is not treated like the other elements. It does not take part in the game of probability and uncertainty. It stands apart, as if it does not belong to the same layer of reality. This does not make the theory ineffective. It simply leaves a very quiet gap in the overall picture. On quiet nights, when there is no pressure to explain or to prove, that gap can be felt like a whisper. Not a warning, but a suggestion. That perhaps somewhere deeper, the role of time has not yet been fully told. That its stability in the quantum world is not a final truth, but a temporary shelter. But this need not cause unease. The world still functions. Experiments still repeat. Devices still operate. Life continues within its familiar rhythm. Time still flows evenly, enough for us to lie down and relax. Only within that peace, there is a very gentle awareness that the story is not yet complete, that the world has changed how it looks at matter, while still holding on to an older way of seeing time. And that this holding on, though necessary, also carries a quiet waiting. In the safe space of this unfolding narrative, we do not need to pursue that waiting right away. It is enough to let it remain there, like a very distant star, not yet needing to be located. Time continues to do its familiar work, keeping everything in motion, allowing deeper questions to wait for a more fitting moment. When the night is quiet enough and the mind is calm enough. Relativity, the collapse of universal time. And then, very gently, like when a lake that seems perfectly still begins to ripple with a thin wave, the idea of a single rhythm of time shared by all no longer remains unmoved. Not because anyone sought to unsettle it, but because the universe, when listened to more closely, whispered something different. Something not loud, not disruptive, yet deep enough to change the way humans stand within that flow. When people began to look farther, not only into the very small, but also into the very fast, the steady motion of light. a small inconsistency appeared. Light did not seem to follow familiar rules. It did not add speed when the observer was moving. It traveled at the same speed regardless of who was watching, whether that person was standing still or rushing forward. This calmness of light posed a question that did not need to be spoken, yet could not be ignored. If light is always like this, then what must change for the world to remain consistent? Not light, not the laws themselves. What remained was the way we arrange space and time. And in that moment, very quietly, time stepped out of its role as an unmoving foundation. It was no longer a single current, flowing evenly for everyone, everywhere. It became tied to motion, tied to the path each object traces through the universe. Two identical clocks, if they follow different journeys, will no longer accumulate the same amount of time. Not because one is broken, but because time itself has become different. This thought does not need shock to be profound. It only needs to be set down gently, that there is no central clock keeping rhythm for the entire universe. No single shared now that all places inhabit together. Each person, each object, each particle carries its own rhythm of time, woven from its motion and its position in space. Nearby, at familiar speeds, these rhythms almost coincide. They blend smoothly enough to feel like one. But as distances grow, as motion changes, differences begin to appear, not as cracks, but as a very slight tilt in how the world is sliced into moments. There is something deeply peaceful in the way the universe allows this. It does not erase order. It only changes where that order resides. Instead of living in a shared timeline, order lives in the relationships between events, in which events can influence others and which cannot. The flow of causality is preserved, carefully, consistently. But the concept of simultaneity is no longer protected in the old way. Two distant events may be considered simultaneous by one observer and not by another. Not because anyone is mistaken, but because each slices space-time into now differently. Each slice is valid. None is chosen as absolute. Time, in this picture, is no longer a river flowing through a fixed land. It becomes part of the land itself. Space and time interweave, inseparable. Each motion is a line drawn within a larger structure, where distance and duration are no longer independent. Within that structure, what each clock truly measures is not the time of the universe, but its own proper time, the time it accumulates along the path it travels. This time is personal, yet not subjective. It is determined by the shape of space-time through which the clock moves. Hearing this may cause the mind to slow for a moment, but it need not bring unease. Because in everyday life, the paths we travel are very similar. We share one planet, one gravitational field, small velocities. The clocks around us remain nearly synchronized. Any differences, if they exist, pass like whispers too faint to reach the senses. What changes is not daily experience, but our understanding of its foundation. Time is no longer a silent backdrop. It becomes a flexible element, woven into the structure of the universe itself. Not to complicate things, but to preserve consistency in the laws, everywhere, for everyone. There is a quiet beauty in this shift. It does not destroy the old view, it enfolds it. Absolute time was a very good approximation within a narrow region of reality. Now that approximation is placed within a broader frame, where it remains valid, but no longer exclusive. In this telling, the universe does not require a central clock to function. It functions through its own shape, through the arrangement of events in space-time, and through the way each journey accumulates time in its own way. Agreement comes not from sharing a single now, but from sharing the same causal structure. In this quiet space, there is no need to imagine extreme transformations. It is enough to allow the idea that time is no longer a single block. It is a network of individual flows, merging gently where things are familiar, and separating where distances grow vast. This does not make the world feel alien. On the contrary, it makes familiarity more fragile and more precious. The fact that we can say now and be understood immediately is a very special condition. One sustained by living slowly, living close together, living within the same rhythm. And in this quiet night, when there is no need to synchronize with anyone, no need to share a common clock, we can feel time in its simplest form, like a breath, like a presence, not the time of the universe, but the time of this journey, flowing very gently, very evenly, enough for us to soften and rest, while the universe continues to whisper deeper structures slowly and safely. Gravity makes time physical. And when the idea of time no longer stands still as a single straight line shared by all, the universe continues to speak softly, adding something deeper, slower. Not only motion alters the rhythm of time, even presence itself, the quiet heaviness of matter, is enough to make time behave differently. Here, time is no longer tied only to how we move through the world. It begins to bind itself to the very shape of the world itself. Mass does not only pull things toward it, it gently curves space, and within that curvature, time no longer flows as it once did. Near massive objects, time moves more slowly, not in the sense of feeling, but in a very concrete physical sense. Clocks placed in different locations, even if they are identical, even if they are built with absolute precision, will no longer agree when they exist within different gravitational fields. This doesn't happen as a dramatic event. It doesn't cause sudden disruption. It unfolds quietly, little by little, so slowly that in everyday life, we do not notice it at all. On the surface of the Earth, the difference is very small. A clock placed lower, closer to the planet's center, will run more slowly than one placed higher up, by only a tiny fraction of a second over many years. Too small to feel, too small to unsettle us. But small as it is, that difference is real. It does not depend on whether we believe in it. It does not depend on whether we pay attention. Time, in this understanding, is no longer a silent backdrop. It responds. It answers the presence of matter, like water responding to a stone placed very gently upon its surface. There is a quiet beauty in this. Time is no longer an abstract concept standing outside the world. It becomes part of the world itself, affected, shaped, participating in the shared structure. It is not only something that measures change, it is something that is changed. And what is remarkable is that this change is not beyond human reach. It does not appear only in distant corners of the universe. It is present in very familiar technologies, working quietly every day. Systems that navigate around the Earth, signals sent and received, all must account for the tiny differences in the rhythm of time between the ground and the high sky. Without adjustment, those minute discrepancies would accumulate, becoming large enough to shift our maps of the world. Here, time is no longer an assumption. It is an element that must be cared for, adjusted, listened to. It does not simply flow. It must be understood in the right place, in the right way, so that everything can remain in harmony. But if we move away from the Earth, away from that gentle familiarity, and allow imagination to drift a little farther, time begins to reveal other faces, clearer, deeper. Near heavy stars, where matter is compressed beyond easy imagining, time slows down noticeably. No longer by tiny fractions of a second across many years, but by differences that could touch intuition if one could stand there and observe. In such places, each pulse of time carries the weight of the surrounding space. A second is no longer a standard second in the familiar sense. It is a second of that place, of that gravitational field, of that particular shape of space-time. And this does not make time chaotic. On the contrary, it makes time deeply honest to the environment in which it exists. And then, in even deeper regions, and where mass is concentrated to the extreme, time nearly contracts, slowing so much that from far away, all motion appears frozen. Light emitted there is stretched and weakened, like whispers trying to escape from a very deep dream. Yet for whatever exists within, time still flows according to its own rhythm, without stopping, without breaking. Only that rhythm is no longer shared with the outside world. This reminds us that there is no single standard speed of time, no absolute rhythm that all places must obey. Each region of the universe carries its own rhythm, woven from mass, energy, and the shape of the surrounding space. Time becomes a very faithful companion to its circumstances. And in this view, time is no longer a passive witness to the universe. It is a participant. It curves when space curves. It slows when energy is concentrated. It exists alongside matter, inseparable, never standing apart. This participation need not be felt as a threat. It does not make the world unstable. It simply makes the world more subtle. The laws remain deeply consistent. What changes is how we tell their story. Time is no longer an invisible background flow. It becomes a living element, very quiet, very slow, but present. On this quiet night, as everything is softened, we may not need to think about heavy stars or deep regions of space. It is enough to know that even here, where we are resting, time carries the imprint of the earth, of this planet's mass, of the journey we are sharing together. Each second that passes is not an abstract second. It is a second of this place, a second woven from gravity, from motion, from the larger structure of the universe. And within that weaving, there is a deep sense of safety. Because time does not flow at random. It flows according to stable, profound forms, upheld by the very structure of reality itself. When we understand that time can slow, can stretch, can carry the imprint of matter, we do not need to worry that it will vanish or betray us. On the contrary, we can see that time is deeply bound to this world. It does not leave. It remains everywhere, only with different rhythms. And in this moment, its rhythm is gentle enough, steady enough, for us to soften the body, release the thoughts, and allow ourselves to drift with the very particular flow of this night's time. A flow that does not need to be absolute, does not need to be shared by the entire universe. Only gentle enough to support rest, while the universe, in more distant places, continues to whisper its deeper story, slowly and safely. The problem of time, quantum gravity crisis. And then, when time has revealed itself as something that can be bent, slowed by mass and energy, the stream of reflection drifts onward to a place even quieter, yet more fragile. Here, it is no longer about time flowing faster or slower, no longer about each place carrying its own rhythm. Here, the question becomes gentle but deep. What happens if there is no longer any place left that can stand outside and measure time at all. Up to this point, even though time has become relative, it has still been present. Each clock still carries its own rhythm. Each journey through space-time still accumulates moments that are undeniably real. But when humans try to listen to the universe at its deepest level, where the smallest vibrations of reality meet the largest structure of space, a strange silence appears. And within that silence, time no longer occupies its familiar place. When matter is described in the language of quantum theory, everything becomes soft, fragmented, probability replacing clear trajectories. And when space-time itself is described as a dynamic entity, responding to what exists within it, there is no longer a fixed stage from which to observe. Everything is inside. There is no background, no backdrop. At this intersection, where space is no longer a frame and matter is no longer a separate actor, time suddenly finds nowhere to stand. Not because it is removed, but because there is no longer anyone to play the role of an external clock. There is no shared rhythm given in advance for everything to rely on. Time, once borrowed as a foundation, can no longer be borrowed. From this effort, a very quiet equation is written. It does not tell a story of progression. It does not speak of before or after. It stands there like a still image, describing the entire universe in a single state, without requiring a flow. In that equation, there is no familiar symbol for time, no arrow, no rhythm, only a deep constraint linking the shape of space with the possibilities of matter. When first encountering this, the feeling is not panic, but a gentle sway in perception, like standing on a shoreline at night and looking out into a darkness with no clear horizon. Nothing breaks, nothing vanishes suddenly. Only what was once familiar no longer appears in its old position. The universe, in this description, does not evolve in the usual sense. It does not move from past to future. It exists as a whole, where all possibilities are held together within a silent structure. This does not mean there is no change. It only means that change is no longer told through an external timeline. And it is precisely here that a very strange feeling arises. A soft dizziness without sharp edges. Because if the equation of the universe does not need time in order to exist, then what is it that is flowing when we feel everything flowing? If there is no shared clock of reality, then where does the rhythm we hear each night come from? The answer is not offered as a conclusion. It appears as a faint suggestion. Perhaps time does not disappear. Perhaps it simply ceases to be a foundational axis. Perhaps it emerges from within, from relationships, from relative change between parts of the universe. Something that can serve as a clock for something else, while itself is also changing. In this space, there is no clock hanging on the wall of the universe. No common rhythm counting for all. There are only relative motions, parallel transformations, small stories telling of differences between this and that. Time, if it appears as a relationship, not as an independent river. This may sound like a dissolution, but in this slow rhythm of telling, it carries a deep calm. Because no equation says that our experience is false. No line of mathematics denies that a clock still ticks, or that a sleep still passes. The silence of the equation does not erase experience. It simply does not place that experience at the deepest foundation. Time, at this moment in the story, is like a wave appearing on the surface of a very deep sea. The wave is real. The rhythm is real. But the sea does not need to ripple in order to exist. And for that reason, there is no direct contradiction, only a shift in the depth of the question. Standing here, at this very soft boundary between what can be said and what cannot yet be said, the feeling is not complete disorientation. It is more like a very long pause, a breath, a moment in which the mind recognizes that familiar frameworks are not sufficient to hold all of reality, yet also need not be discarded. This stillness is not the end of time. It is a reminder that time may not be the deepest ground. And that does not make the world cold or meaningless. On the contrary, it makes the moments we are living especially precious. Because if time is not given in advance, then each rhythm we feel is something very delicate, born from the relationship between ourselves and the universe. On this quiet night, we do not need to resolve that mystery. We do not need to find the solution to that silent equation. It is enough to allow that gentle sway to exist, like a very distant star, unreachable, yet enough to make the sky deeper. Time may disappear from the deepest lines of mathematics, but in this slow breath, in the very light presence of a resting body, it is still being felt. Not as an absolute truth, but as an experience unfolding. And perhaps, in that difference, the universe is whispering that not everything needs to be held at the same level in order to matter. The stream of reflection does not need to close. It can continue to flow, very slowly, very evenly, carrying the reassurance that even if time does not appear at the deepest level of theory, it remains close enough to support this sleep. A sleep that needs no answers, only presence, while the universe, at its deepest layer, quietly holds its open questions, like a gentle darkness between the stars. Coexistence, emergence, and humility. And after that very deep pause, where time seemed to dissolve into the silence of equations that no longer required it, the stream of reflection does not end. It simply softens. Like the surface of a lake after a light wind has passed, not perfectly still, yet calm enough to reflect the sky without breaking it apart. Here, there is no longer a need to decide what time is once and for all. The universe does not seem to demand a single definition in order to continue functioning. It allows many ways of telling the story to coexist, as long as each way is used in the right place, at the right depth. Time, within this allowance, becomes more flexible, gentler, and also more humble. There are layers of reality where time appears as a very clear flow, steady enough to support life, memory, and familiar habits. In those layers, there is nothing wrong with trusting in day and night, in before and after, in calendars and clocks. These beliefs are not illusions. They are finely tuned tools, shaped through millions of years of living slowly on a stable planet. And then there are other layers, deeper ones, where time no longer stands apart. There it appears as a relationship, as a consequence, as a rhythm born from other things. Not because time grows weaker, but because reality grows richer in structure. Older descriptions are no longer sufficient. Yet that does not make them wrong. They simply become local. Like a highly accurate map of a small region, not required to cover the entire world in order to remain useful. In this view, there is no contradiction that needs to be erased. There is only layering. Each layer carries a language suited to its depth, and wisdom lies not in choosing one layer to deny the others, but in knowing when to speak which language. The time of everyday life does not need to yield to the time of the deep universe. They do not compete. They serve different needs. A clock on a work desk does not need to know the shape of curved space-time to fulfill its role. And an equation describing the entire universe does not need to care about a morning schedule in order to remain internally consistent. This coexistence is not a sign of ignorance. It is a sign of a mature science, one that knows how to pause before rushing demands for absolutes. One that understands a description can be very true in one place without needing to be true everywhere. One that knows usefulness does not have to come paired with fundamentality. There is a very gentle beauty in this acceptance. It frees us from the need to force the universe into a single frame. It allows different stories to be told side by side, not negating one another, but quietly completing one another. And within that completion, time appears not as a puzzle to be solved, but as a companion with many faces. Up close, it is familiar, predictable, reliable enough to lean on each day. From farther away, it becomes strange, soft, no longer fixed. At great depth, it may dissolve into pure relationships, where it no longer needs to be named at all. No face is false. No face holds exclusive claim to truth. Each is simply a way reality allows itself to be touched, from a very specific position, with very clear limits. And recognizing those limits is what makes understanding lighter, no longer strained. Perhaps the deepest thing the universe whispers here is not a new definition of time, but an attitude. A reminder that even humanity's most powerful concepts are still bridges, not the far shore. They help us travel a great distance, but they do not need to be carried everywhere. On this quiet night, as the body gradually relaxes, there is no need to decide whether time is fundamental or merely emergent. It is enough to know that the rhythm being felt is real enough for this moment, enough for the breath to deepen, enough for thoughts to slow, enough for sleep to arrive without explanation. The universe does not require us to understand it completely in order to exist within it. It only asks for listening that is just sufficient, respect for what cannot yet be named, and humility before the bottomless depth of reality. Time, within this setting, is no longer a problem to be solved, but a flow that can be stepped into and stepped out of, depending on where one stands. And perhaps the greatest peace comes from accepting that there is no supreme clock hanging on the wall of the universe, no single rhythm that everything must obey. Only many rhythms, many ways of flowing, many layers of storytelling, all coexisting without needing to merge into one. Within that quiet diversity, we can rest, because there is no longer pressure to grasp time as an object. We can simply be within it, in the way this small life allows, a way that is sufficient, a way that is safe. The stream of reflection slowly settles, not because it has reached an end, but because there is no longer a need to go further. Like a boat drifting on very calm water, no more rowing required, no need to know where the shore lies. Time, whether as foundation or as emergence, is still supporting this moment. And that, for tonight, is enough.